Hello, my name is Nicole, and I am here to share another feedback loop to help connect the dots between different organs that are going to work together to create a coordinated homeostatic response. The topic of this video is going to look at the epinephrine release. That is going to happen from the medulla area of the adrenal gland. So for all of these videos on hormone feedback loops designed primarily for your general A&P class for allied health, you'll see in the upper corner, we'll always label the gland that we are considering any specific location, this case the medulla, and then the hormone that will be released. Now there's a few other key points that we're going to make note of just to help remind our brain and develop this pattern. So the first one is that our hormone that we're looking at today is a protein-based hormone, and protein-based hormones are going to be dissolved into the blood plasma as a form of transportation around the body. So we're going to make note of that now. Fantastic. So you'll see underneath our label now in the upper corner of the screen that we have the words protein-based to indicate the solubility coefficient, meaning how well this hormone is going to be carried in the bloodstream. And in parentheses, you'll see the acronym DIP, DIP, which stands for dissolved in plasma, which is the fluid component of the blood. Now, we are also going to include in our reminding information in the upper corner that we are talking about things that are functionally going to assist the body in some key aspect. So we're also going to include under this same label a couple of functions. Functions of epinephrine are going to include a handful of things. So we're going to put FXN because that is a handy abbreviation to be able to note what the purpose of this hormone is when it binds to its target tissues. So with our functions that you'll see in this upper hand corner, we're going to include an increase in respiratory rate, as well as the addition of an increased heart rate, and that is going to help support our somatic motor division in a fight or flight type of a response. Now, in addition to this, the respiratory rate does not always or not just increase, but there is also something that is called bronchodilation. So we're going to add bronchodilation to our key. And we want to think about this as open airways. So if I'm going to breathe more frequently, I need to bring more oxygen into the system. And in order to bring more oxygen into the system, I need to make sure that my airways are open to bring the oxygen in so that the increased blood flow from the heart through the lungs is going to be able to oxygenate that blood. Now, we're going to also add a triangle. Now, in chemistry, this is the delta symbol, which frequently references change. So we're going to use this as a shorthand to say change of blood vessel diameter. Blood vessel diameter. Now, we are using change as a general because depending upon where the receptors are in the body, in some places those receptors are going to cause vasoconstriction and reduce blood flow to the area, like constriction in the gut to divert the blood to the skeletal muscles. And in the skeletal muscle, in the somatic division area, we're going to see those muscles are going to see a vasodilation to increase blood flow to that area to be able to make sure that we are supporting those cells in their function of a fight or flight type of a reflex. So these are going to be the notes in our upper hand corner. This is sort of our general label to help remind us about these structures. Okay, one more job that epinephrine is going to do. And this is not its primary purpose, but definitely something that we see taking place. We're going to put another little arrow up. We're going to put the initials BG, which stands for blood glucose. So when epinephrine is released, and I'm trying to support that skeletal muscle frame in fighting or flighting, I need to make sure that there are all of the necessary nutrients to convert ATP through the cellular respiration process. So when I think about the purpose of epinephrine, this hormone is supporting that somatic division in being able to escape a predator or to respond to a form of a stressful event. Okay, so what we're going to do is diagram the different areas of the body that are connected when this hormone feedback loop is occurring. So what we're going to do is we're going to draw a brain. And my students always tease me because I tend to draw sheep brains. So we're going to try to make it a little more human-esque. I don't know that this is any better. We're going to put our regions of the brain stem. Okay, so up here we have the cerebrum. You might be familiar with that one. And next to the cerebrum is the cerebellum. And then we have other anatomy like the pituitary gland and the brain stem. So that information is hopefully something that you're already a bit familiar with. The other key component to understanding epinephrine is that this is a unique situation where the brain is using a neuron to reach all the way out to the target organ to cause the release of the hormone. So this is a little bit different. We're kind of riding the line between autonomic nervous system function and true endocrine signaling. So the way that this system is going to work is that a sympathetic nerve fiber is going to come likely from the hypothalamus, but from the upper regions of the brain, head out the brainstem, and then out to a target tissue. And this is going to be happening through the sympathetic chain ganglia, through a collateral ganglia, as we have this really long preganglionic neuron headed out to this target tissue. So hopefully you're familiar with your autonomic nervous system enough to know of the sympathetic division. And so these are sympathetic neurons that are triggering or reaching out to my target organ. And those, you may remember, come out through the thoracic and the lumbar areas. We'll put an L up there, T1 to L1, because the sympathetic nervous system is what we call the thoracolumbar system. All right, so this is how the brain is going to communicate to the gland that we want to release epinephrine. And the gland, we know, because we labeled it in our upper right-hand corner, is the adrenal gland, and specifically this is targeting the medulla. So the adrenal gland sits on top of your kidneys. That's going to sit retroperitoneal, meaning right behind where the body cavity is. They're kind of nestled up against the lower area of your rib cage and lining along your back. And so your kidneys have the adrenal gland sitting on top of it. So we're going to draw this structure. Reminds me a little bit of a Pac-Man ghost. And that's the figure I use to represent the adrenal gland. And we're going to draw this middle area and even color it in to represent that that is the medulla area of the adrenal gland. And one of the things that is neat about the adrenal area of the medulla gland is that the cells that function in this area specialize in making protein-based hormones. In other videos, you will hear me talk about the cortex of the medulla and how the cortex of the medulla specializes in lipid-based hormones. And that has to do with different cells and their genetic abilities and what they're able to do on the inside. Okay, so sympathetic nervous system from the brain is going to send a neuron all the way down and out to the adrenal gland, and the adrenal gland is going to release our hormone. And the hormone that we will be releasing is epinephrine. This can also release small amounts of norepinephrine, but we're going to focus in on the epinephrine effect specifically. So once I get this hormone out, this hormone is going to then start to circulate through the bloodstream, and it's going to bind to any tissues that have receptors for epinephrine. Now, if you did your autonomic nervous system chapter already, you may remember alpha and beta receptors as broad categories of sympathetic nervous fibers that can bind. You may also have been exposed to the idea that there are subcategories. There's alpha 1s and alpha 2s and beta 1s and beta 2s and beta 3s. And so we have all these various types of receptors that have the ability to respond to this hormone when it is released. So, depending upon the receptor, and the receptor specifically that we're looking for with this reaction is 1, blood vessels. So we're going to draw a little tube like this, and we're going to write BV on it to remind ourselves that this is the blood vessel. And the effect that we see in the blood vessel, we already wrote in the upper left-hand corner of the screen. So one of the things that's going to happen is that the blood vessel is going to constrict in the viscera. And if viscera is not a familiar term to us, sometimes you might think of it as the guts. These are the digestive organs of our abdominal pelvic cavity. At the same time, this hormone is able to bind into receptors in other blood vessels. So a different type of receptor that when it gets signaled says, okay, now it's time to dilate the blood vessels in, we're going to write periphery. And so you might think of that as in the limbs, because the goal of this overall system is to support us in making sure that we are doing sympathetic types of responses, the fight or the flight. And if I'm going to do anything physical in the fighting or the flighting, that means that we have to support the somatic division, and we need to get blood flow out to our skeletal muscles to support that need. Now remember, another function that we talked about is going to target the heart. So we're going to draw a little picture of a heart here just to remind ourselves. I like those pictorial images to help my brain connect the organs with some of the words that we're talking about. And we said this is going to cause an increase in heart rate. Perhaps you remember from studying the autonomic nervous system that the beta 1 receptors are going to be present in your SA node. You may have heard of that. If not, it might be the first time. The point is, receptors that are bound by epinephrine in the heart are going to cause an increase in the heart rate. And at the same time, we're also going to see a change in the lungs. So we're going to see, and we're going to kind of draw these big wide airways here, and we're going to draw 2 circles because you have a right and left lung. They are technically independent of each other, which is very helpful to us in making sure that if one lung is damaged, the other one's able to continue to do oxygenation of blood. This helps keep us alive. Okay, so what is the effect in the lungs? Well, 2 effects that we listed in the upper left-hand corner. 1, we're going to see an increase in the respiratory rate. So the muscles are going to contract faster to help supply more oxygen, get more oxygen into the blood that is coming through because the heart rate also increased in this response. In addition, we have to add another thing, which is, notice the big airways. This is going to be what we call bronchio, I'm going to put a little dash, dilation. So these things are going to open, right? This is our open airway feature. So this is quite handy. Epinephrine is used even clinically when we have a patient who has narrowed airways, they're not able to breathe. Epinephrine may be administered to try to get those airways to open up and to get more oxygen into the patient's body. All right, so we've covered 2 of the 3 functions that we expect from this particular hormone, epinephrine. But remember, we also had that little note about having an influence on blood glucose levels. So we need another arrow over to the side. And as we move this arrow over to the side, we're going to draw another organ. When I draw this organ, I draw it in this general shape, but because you may not know what it is, or I might not remember later, I'm going to put liver under it just to remind me about that organ that's sitting up in my abdominal cavity. And one of the things that the liver is going to do developmentally daily is to collect extra sugar that you have eaten. And the extra sugar that comes into the human body, we want to store for later, for periods when we might not have as much sugar. So between meals, when I'm trying to get from one meal to the next meal, my liver is going to hook me up with some glucose. So the way that this works is, as we eat food and as we're going through the digestive process, the liver is going to be taking all of that extra glucose and it's going to store it in a form. So we're going to call that form glycogen. But when epinephrine's around, this is going to tell the liver to increase the breakdown of the glycogen. And when that glycogen breaks down, that is going to take that complex sugar that it stored it as and break it into the individual pieces we reference as glucose. So when I increase the breakdown of glycogen, that will result in an increase in glucose. So then what do I have to do? I just drop it into my bloodstream and now I've increased my blood glucose levels. So if we think about the epinephrine hormone as a system, we find that our brain is going to be involved in signaling through a neuron to the adrenal gland, the center part known as the medulla, that it's time to release this protein-based hormone you and I commonly refer to as adrenaline. but clinically we're going to call epinephrine. Epinephrine is going to look for all of the tissues that have the receptors, so it will bind to blood vessels, and depending on what blood vessel it binds to, it may either inhibit the action, causing vasodilation, or it may cause constriction in other areas. These receptors in the heart are going to speed up the heart rate, the receptors in the lung speed up the respiratory rate, and bronchiodilate to make sure that we're getting good open airways to allow oxygen in. Here I'm supporting cellular respiration. Remember, oxygen is needed to convert ATP in the most efficient form. So, making sure I have ample amounts of blood, ample amounts of oxygen getting out to those tissues is going to be really critical in making sure that overall I'm supporting those tissues. But there's another piece to the cellular respiration puzzle, which is I can have all the oxygen in the world, but if I don't have that glucose molecule to convert and run through the steps, the glycolysis, Krebs cycle, electron transport chain, then all the oxygen in the world isn't going to help me generate more ATP. So my liver gets involved here and says, hey, I've got your back. I stored some of this earlier when we had too much, but now I'm going to release some of the glucose into the bloodstream so that you can utilize that, the cells can utilize that in their cellular respiration process to generate ATP. All right, so this is how it works, but then the question develops, why? Why would I ever release epinephrine? What is the net purpose of releasing that epinephrine? So there are a couple of triggers, some things that your hypothalamus or your brain in general are going to be paying attention to indicate when is the appropriate time to start releasing epinephrine. And so there are a couple of things that we're going to list out as things that the brain is paying attention to as it attempts to maintain homeostasis to determine, is it time for me to release epinephrine? So your brain is one, looking for stress. So we're going to put a little up arrow, and I'm using green now because in kindergarten you learned green means go and red means stop. So we'll use green here. So increase of stress is one of the things that your brain is going to be paying attention to. So I'm going to put a little plus sign over the top of it just as a reminder that, hey, we really are in a situation where this is going to enhance or signal this process to get going. Now, we have to take a quick minute to talk about what stress is. And it turns out there's different types of stress that your brain will perceive. One form of stress that we perceive is an emotional stress. Ever have a fight with a significant other, a family member, your sibling, and you get stressed out? Maybe you have a conflict with somebody at work. This can create stress that your brain will then use and release epinephrine in an acute stress response. We also have psychological stresses. Is your to-do list growing faster than your to-done list? Do you have a test coming up soon? Is there a big project at work that's looming over your head that they want you to get done very quickly? Do you have an ailing parent and now you have to do all of their doctor's appointments and grocery shopping for them, but you also have to take care of yourself and your own family? Those are psychological stresses. And then the other thing that the body perceives as stress is physical stress. Right? So what we call that physical activity. And most of us don't really think of physical activity as a stress form, but really what are we doing? We're asking our skeletal muscle, we're asking our somatic motor division to divert energy to skeletal muscles in order to exercise. So your brain really doesn't care what kind of stress it is, it's just going to respond to stress with this acute response and release of epinephrine. Now there's a couple of other things that we also will see. So another one, and we'll put up here, is a decrease in blood glucose. Now there are lots of hormones that can ultimately influence your blood glucose levels, but we're going to make a note that blood glucose is one of the things that may end up being influenced. So in dire situations, if your other hormones are not taking care of you the way that they're supposed to take care of you, we anticipate that you may have a dose of epinephrine because your body is perceiving a stress. It's a stress response. Now, there's another thing that frequently causes stress responses that we may see cause a change in epinephrine. And so what we're going to do up here is write pain, because pain also can be perceived technically as a stress that is going to cause the body to need to do things to fix itself, to deal with this particular situation. And if you're in pain, if you're in intense pain, we need to be able to support the body tissue with good blood flow as part of a healing process. So we can see pain and extreme pain, right? I'm not talking about a paper cut. I'm talking about a kidney stone, or I'm talking about going into labor. And those are the kinds of things, those are the big pains that we're going to see that it may generate a sympathetic fight or flight type of response. Okay, so now we've got those things that are going to start the process. We've got our brain paying attention to environmental things that it may want to elicit a change from. We've got our hormone that is released, and we also have the target tissues, which have the receptors to be able to respond. And we've listed out at the bottom of the screen those ways that we typically see a response taking place when epinephrine is in fact released. Okay. Now, the whole goal of all of this is to maintain something that we call homeostasis. And so if I think about homeostasis as my net goal, right? This is where I want to be. I want to be in homeostasis. Then the goal of these hormones should be to support the body in that net goal. So when I think about stresses specifically are going to activate this system, and as soon as the stress disappears, this whole system should shut off, because it turns out that epinephrine has what we refer to as a half-life. So I'm going to write half-life over here as a reminder that epinephrine is going to break down in our body. It's not going to have an indefinite effect. And because it's a protein-based hormone, it's acted on by a number of features in the body, like enzymes in the blood, or the kidneys and their ability to metabolize and pee out products. And we're going to see half-life of epinephrine, half-life of protein things breaking down. So as we look at epinephrine, we know that it lasts approximately, I'm going to put in the upper hand corner, that little approximately 20 minutes. That's what people get on average every time epinephrine is released into the system. So if I'm in a prolonged, exaggerated type of response, then I'm going to have to keep releasing epinephrine to keep me in the stress response. But normally, if I did something like ran up behind you and yelled, "Boo!" and I scared you, you would get a quick dose of epinephrine, but 20 minutes later, you would be able to go back to your calm state. That sympathetic response should have ended. So in general, when we're thinking about epinephrine, most of the time this functions as a positive feedback system. So we'll make another note over here that when stress is the thing that I am referring to, we should be able to end this by going through that positive feedback system. And as soon as the stress is gone, then we should move out of that epinephrine release. That hormone should be metabolized within 20 minutes, and I should be able to go back to a nice, calm, and reserved state of existence, okay? But there is a fun little link with this hormone, which comes from the blood glucose. So if I look at this blood glucose over here, and I'm going to use red because this will stop it. If I am getting epinephrine release because my glucose levels are low, when glucose is released, it's going to go into the bloodstream, and that's going to cause an increase in the blood glucose levels. And that increase in blood glucose is what is getting me back to homeostasis. Okay? So you can maybe see that a little bit better now, that blood glucose levels coming in. Now, remember one of the key signals was this decreased blood glucose. So in this situation, if and when epinephrine is used because your other hormones are all whacked out, if epinephrine is being used to increase blood glucose levels, then we should be able to release the protein-based hormone from the adrenal gland, and then from the adrenal gland, the liver will release some glucose that it had stored as it breaks down glycogen. That's going to bring my blood glucose levels back to normal. So in this situation, if I'm thinking about specifically the blood glucose levels, if epinephrine is involved in this system to help maintain the blood glucose levels, we see it functioning more in what we would call a negative feedback. So, for the most part, epinephrine is positive feedback. Either I'm stressed or I'm not stressed. And if I'm not stressed, I'm just fine. Okay? All right, so a lot of information on our board. We have in the upper left-hand corner the information about the adrenal gland, the medulla section specifically releasing the hormone known as epinephrine. We have discussed that it's a protein-based hormone, so the DIP, again in that upper left-hand corner, is referencing the dissolved in plasma component. Our generalized functions, we expect changes in vascularization, changes in blood vessel diameter. We expect heart rate and respiratory rate to increase while the airways open. We call that bronchodilation. And we also expect an influence on the blood glucose levels as we are supporting the somatic division in its attempt to fight or flight. This system starts with the brain, receiving and determining what sort of response it needs. It's acting as the integrator in our homeostatic feedback loop. It's sending an efferent signal out to the adrenal medulla to cause the release of the hormone. And the hormone, epinephrine, is released into the bloodstream. Any tissue with the receptor, like those in blood vessels, in the heart rate, in the respiratory rate, or even in the liver, are going to be able to respond and make some very specific changes to support the body through that fight or flight response. As soon as that fight or flight response is over, the benefit to that is that now we're going to overcome this situation. Now, epinephrine will get eliminated from my system thanks to enzymes, natural breakdown processes, the kidneys, and then I can go back to my normal state of being until the next stress response. So I hope this helps you connect the ideas associated with the epinephrine hormone and how it's affecting its target tissues. Also, hope you join and look at one of the other hormone feedback loops if you're struggling with these concepts and trying to make sense of them. Have a great day.